But yes, thank you so much. I think we'll just jump right in and get started. So I'm going to take a couple of minutes just to say hello to everyone. And then Mr. Langfellow, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself and give your opening statements if you wish. So again, welcome everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Mia, and I'm a member of the Robbinsdale Racial Justice Group, and I'm a resident in Ward 3. I live near Lee Park. I want to thank you all for joining us, and I especially want to thank Wally Langfellow, our Robbinsdale mayoral candidate, for speaking with us today. The intention of this meeting is to allow for a space to talk about racial justice and equity issues as they pertain to our elected officials ahead of our primary election coming up on August 11th. Several members of the Robbinsdale for Racial Justice group have come up with a series of questions, and I've presented these questions to Wally a couple of days ago. And we're here to listen and become better informed voters. For those of us who are white members of the community, we are here to be better allies to our neighbors who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color. With that said, we will allow space for follow-up questions from the audience at the end, and white people will defer and listen to BIPOC members when they have something to say. This meeting is recorded, and you can see a recording icon on your screen, and you'll notice that the audience microphones are on mute for right now, and then you'll be invited to ask follow-up questions via the chat later on. So, and I'll open your microphones if you prefer. So the meeting structure will be as follows. In a moment, Mr. Langfellow will have roughly 5 minutes for an introduction and an opening statement, and I will spend about 30 minutes with the questions that we voted on, and then we will take questions from you in the chat for about 15 minutes, and that portion will be with Nick. Finally, Mr. Langfellow will have 2 minutes for any closing statements at the end, where we will wrap up the meeting. So a little bit of housekeeping. I got a little bit of like audio feedback of like an echo or some kind of odd audio. Maybe you can let me know in the chat if everything is okay. You can hear me clearly. Everyone is okay? Okay, good. That just must be a little glitch. All right, so Mr. Langfellow, thank you so much for being here. Will you please introduce yourself and give us your opening statement?
Sure. Well, thank you and I apologize for the tardiness of this. It was all technology related, believe me. I guess the first thing I want to say to everybody is that none of this is new to me. I have been walking the walk for a very long time with regard to reaching out and being part of and living and doing things with particularly the African American community. 10 years ago, I started with a partner a program where we are moving to bring the game of baseball to the small West African nation of Benin. And we have been working for the last 10 years. I've been to West Africa twice in the last 10 years now. And it's a rewarding project, and it's a project that where we have brought kids from Africa to Minnesota, to Robbinsdale in particular. They stayed here for, are you hearing me okay, Mia? Are you hearing me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
You are?
I can hear you, yep.
Okay, I thought you were talking.
Thanks for checking.
That's okay, thank you. It's just a very small part of what I'm doing for the last several years. I run a couple of sports organizations and have been involved in sports organizations where we are doing a lot of work with youth, and Robbins basketball organization. I started. Are you hearing me okay? That's okay, thank you. All part of what I'm doing for sports organizations and have been involved in sports. a lot of work with. Started myself about this was, generally speaking, our participation is well over 50%. And working with families on a regular basis, I know what a lot of them are going through. Again, I am walking the walk. I am just not picking this all up just because it's an election year. This is something that I do all the time. And matter of fact, back in 2007, I worked with former twin Tory Hunter. We started the Tory Hunter program because I've in the media through my relationship and getting to know Tory, becoming friends with Tory. Tory wanted to reach out and get more African Americans involved in baseball. So we started a program in Robbinsdale Little League where we brought kids in from Minneapolis. We brought African American kids in from Minneapolis specifically into Robbinsdale. Tory would pay for their scholarships. I did all the recruiting. Tory pulled out the checkbook, basically, is what it was. And so we got a lot of kids involved as a result of that. As a matter of fact, when I left the program, the Little League program in 2010, 4 seasons later, we were at our highest amount of registration in the history of Robbinsdale Little League. And it was a result of that program bringing kids in from Minneapolis. And there was a lot of work involved in that. It was knocking on doors and talking to families and going into the schools in North Minneapolis and getting these kids involved and getting the families and getting them comfortable with coming to Robbinsdale and playing baseball. And so I was proud of what we were able to do there. With that said, I think that I bring a lot of history in this particular area to this position, and I'm looking forward to taking some of that and bringing it to the mayor's office, hopefully come January 1st.
Great, thank you. So for the next part of our meeting, we'll be asking you a series of questions that this group has submitted and organized in advance. And again, for transparency's sake, these questions were presented to Mr. Langfellow a few days ago. And by the way, any other candidate that's also meeting with this group in other Zoom calls, these same questions will be asked in the same order. So for the next session, while I'm asking you these questions, I'll refrain from asking any follow-up questions at this time. But Wally, if you see any activity in the chat box, if you want to address in real time, please feel free. Also, for the sake of respecting your time and everyone's time, if there are any answers that exceed, let's say, 3 minutes, if it's okay with you, I will kindly say 15 seconds and then just ask you to summarize and wrap up so we can get to as many questions as possible today. Does that work for you?
Sure.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's jump right in with our first question. Again, these questions we voted on order of importance. So our first question, what are some of the racial inequities that you identify in Robbinsdale, and what are the metrics you would use to measure our progress in those areas?
Well, when I first saw this question, the first thing that jumped to my mind is something that I've been familiar with for a very long time, is the lack of diversity within city staff for the City of Robbinsdale.
I'm so sorry, Wally. I'm not sure about the others, but I cannot hear you now. It's gone quiet. Can I confirm with others in the group? Can you tell me in the chat, are you able to hear Wally? Same, okay.
I'm not, I can't hear.
Registration history of Robbinsdale Little League. And it was a result of that program bringing kids in from Minneapolis. And they're working on doors and talking to families and going into the schools in North Minneapolis and getting these kids involved and getting them in baseball. And so I was proud of it. With that said, I think that I bring this position, and I'm looking forward to take hopefully come January 1st.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I'm so sorry, Wally. I mentioned earlier
Come to my
that,
mind is something that for the lack of diversity within city staff. I know that I know there are not that many people of color working. Can you hear me now?
I'm so sorry, we're getting
Can
kind of feedback. Yes, I'm so sorry. So we could hear you for a moment, but then it got choppy. It went quiet, and then your sound was in super speed. So I have closed your video.
Yep.
Now the sound seems really clear. I'm just going to leave your video off.
Yeah, I think that
internet's sake.
Yeah, that might work better.
Do you mind, because we didn't catch your answer, and this is one of our top questions, and I know you got started. We want to be able to hear you. So again, the racial inequities that you identify and the metrics that you would use to measure progress.
Sure, and I'll start over again right where I started at the beginning.
Great.
When I first saw this question, the first thing that popped to my mind when I read the question, and it's still right there, is what I see within the City of Robbinsdale staff. I think that there is, when you walk into City Hall, you don't see very few, if any, people of color working at City Hall. And I think that needs to change. I think they need to do a better job as a city reaching out to the African American community and to people of color to try and get them more involved in in our city, and to get them to apply for the jobs in the city. And then the other one would be our police force. It really needs to happen sooner rather than later. As a matter of fact, now with the chief of police stepping down, this might be a great opportunity for the City of Robbinsdale to go out and to seek some candidates of color, particularly African Americans. I think would be a great idea for us, particularly at this time. So those are the two that come to mind immediately. As far as the metrics to measure our progress, just look at the numbers. Where are we at right now? What is, it should at least reflect what our population is. So if we're sitting at, whatever it is, somewhere between 5 and 10% in the City of Robbinsdale population-wise, that should be reflected within our city staff and on our police department. I know I've been told in the past that, or I heard that, some efforts have been made in that direction, but I think that we need to make more effort in that direction.
Great, thank you. Next question. What strategies will you use to increase racial equity in Robbinsdale if you're elected?
Well, I think the number one thing that I would like to do, take a look at the city budget and assure that spending is equivalent and reflects the population of our community. Kind of going back to what I said originally. So I'd like to add programs that would seek out more minority vendors. Let's have a program where we're looking to get minority business owners, people of color to come in here and run their business. There's a handful, but I think it would really be something that a program within the city that we could, it's a manageable program, and it's something where we could reach out and make that extra effort. Because, if you don't have that, and if you don't make that effort, if it's just on the surface and you really don't make that extra effort and reach out to more, African American owned and minority owned businesses, then they're probably not going to seek you out. And so we have to look for them. And I don't know that we've done that. We've done a very good job of that as a city.
Great, thank you. Now, just for a moment of housekeeping, the audio is perfect now. So I would like to try to open your video again.
Okay.
And let's see if the connection stays okay. I know a lot of the members listening have also turned off their videos just for the sake of bandwidth. Let's see. Did you get
Yep,
ping to open your video now?
I did.
Okay. Okay, perfect. We'll give this a try. If it becomes choppy again, I'm just gonna turn it off and we'll just keep going. Don't worry about it, okay? My next question for
Let's just
you.
live with the audio we have.
Yeah, that's fine too. My next question for you, Mr. Langfellow, have you done any personal work or learning on topics of racism? And if so, what nature?
So, as I talked about a little bit earlier, all of my work has been as a volunteer and working in the community with, families of color, whether it was in Little League, in Robbinsdale Little League, reaching out to families in North Minneapolis, or whether it has been in our Robbinsdale basketball program, or we can even go as far as my program, the program that I am involved with. I'm the vice president of our baseball and Benin West Africa program. So there is no better way to learn about what folks are going through than to be with them, to find out some of the difficulties they have. I get calls from kids all the time. They need a ride. Parents aren't available. Single family parent, they don't have the availability to go and be part of what we're doing as an organization, because they don't have the support at home, because mom has to work and there's no father in the picture. So I go for personal experience on all of this. I haven't been an elected official, but I draw a lot of what I am telling you from what I learned working with families over the last 20 plus years with basketball and baseball organizations. So I'm happy to work with people. I think that that's the most important thing, is that I know what these families are going, and they'll if there is a problem.
Great, thank you. And what policy changes have you contributed to in support of racial justice and equity?
Well, as I said, I've never held elective office, but I've had my own business. And I go for being an elected official. A lot of what I am telling you, 20 plus years old. I'm happy to, the thing is that I know what these families, African Americans, as part of our business. I have, as a matter of fact, I have an African American, and I don't know that anybody else in this campaign does, but I have an African American working on my campaign. What I'm will reflect how I proceed in the job as mayor of Robbinsdale. And so I think that going forward, you can rest assured that my history in that regard speaks for itself. And I'm not sure, as I said, that that any of the other candidates have that, but I've always had people of color working in my business, and I see no reason why that wouldn't be part of how I proceed as mayor as well.
Great, thank you. My next question, what would be your first action as mayor to ensure Robbinsdale is starting down the path of working towards racial equity among our residents, businesses, and schools?
Well, the first thing I think we would need to do is to look at the city budget and be assured that spending is equivalent and reflects the population of our community. Also look at adding programs that, again, would seek out minority vendors. So these are items at the top of the list. As I said on the very first question, I think we need to do a better job of getting more people of color involved in city government, whether it's as an elected official or as a staff member or as volunteer staff members. For instance, our commissions. I know we have a couple of folks in the Human Rights Commission, which is a good start. And I see that there are a couple of African Americans that are running for one of the city council seats, and that's great. And that needs to happen, going forward, continuing. We need to encourage that, because there's no way that you can break through unless we have unless we start somewhere. And these are places where we can start. But I really think as a city, the number one thing is for us to, when people walk into City Hall for whatever, just to pick up a tab for their garbage cans or whatever it is, that they should look around and they should see that, it's just not an all white community sitting in Robbinsdale City Hall. And I think if you go in there now, that's what you see. And it's not necessarily because, there is systemic racism within the city. I just think that it's what people are comfortable with, and maybe African Americans haven't been comfortable. Maybe they haven't been reached out to in the past. And so I really believe that would help people feel more comfortable to go and maybe, go walk into City Hall and say, hey, I've got a problem. Because maybe there's African Americans or people of color in our community who, I don't think I want to go to City Hall because I'm intimidated, because nobody in there looks like me. And I think if that exists, I think that would really help bring the community together a little bit better. And in the long run, it will help us grow as a community and be more accepting and be more inclusive. Those are things that are just, this stuff comes naturally to me. It's hard for me sometimes to understand how people don't get this, but this stuff comes naturally to me because I'm doing it and I deal with it and I live it all the time.
Great, thank you. Now, you touched a little bit on the Human Rights Commission in your last answer. So my next question, maybe you can expand a little bit on that. How would you use the Robbinsdale Human Rights Commission as a resource?
Well, right now, and I think that folks who have been on that commission, and I've talked to people who are on the commission and who have been on the commission, and it's been kind of a benign resource for years. It really has. You ask them and, it's there and they have discussions, but not a lot has come out of it. I think that in some cases they feel powerless. So, there's a planning commission, there's a parks commission, the senior commission, human rights commission. I would like to see all of our commissions, or at least this commission, the Human Rights Commission, I would like to see them get at least as much power as some of the other commissions have. And insofar as one of the proposals that I put forward in the forum the other night, and I didn't get into too much detail because we had 4 minutes, and I'm in talk radio and I could talk for 4 hours, as some of my friends and my wife would tell you. But one of the proposals that I have is to put together a policing task force. And that would include, a member of city council, a member or two of city council, a member or two of the Human Rights Commission, a couple of members from, groups like yours that are seeking racial justice and integrity within our city. And I think that if we have that type of task force that takes a look at, perhaps our hiring processes. How have we been doing hiring in the past? What are some of the policies that we have in regard to training our officers? How is the training going? If we have a task force that looks at that type of thing, and the Human Rights Commission has a member or two on that task force, I think that would give them some more say-so going forward. And then the second part of that question is how would I use it, or how would I like to see the Human Rights Commission used? I think it would behoove us, long term, to have them make regular appearances at city council. I mean, if they're having a meeting, you know, not everybody goes to every one of these meetings. Well, let's have somebody from the Human Rights Commission make an appearance at city council at least once a month, you know, and make regular appearances so they can literally update us on what has been going on in their meetings and what's the agenda for the next meeting, so that as city council, you know, you have exactly what has been going on in those meetings, and that these people have a little bit more, you know, I don't know if power is the right word, but a little more say-so in how policy is developed in our city.
Right. Thank you. My next question, you touched on the Robbinsdale Police Department again in your last answer. So I've got a couple of questions for you.
Sure.
Any other changes that you would envision related to the Robbinsdale Police Department? And also, how would you hold the RPD accountable if there were inappropriate or harmful actions?
Right in my wheelhouse. So one of the things that I have proposed, and this just makes sense to me, is I really believe that our Robbinsdale police reports should be made available unedited every week online on the city's website. I don't know. I know as a reporter, because I'm in the media business, I know as a reporter I can request that information. But the only thing that they see as far as police reports is the 4 or 5 snippets that you get in the Post every week. And I mean, that's hardly a picture of what's going on. So I think it would really help us as a city, and it would help in, you know, as much transparency as possible. That's what we need from our Robbinsdale Police Department. In general, I think they do a pretty good job, but there are going to be holes, and those holes need to be taken care of. And one of the things we could do, you know, body cameras are out there, and they've been out there for a while, and I know that a lot of policemen are in favor of the body cams, and they think it's a good thing. But you know, not every incident is going to end up with people being able to see what the body cam shows them. So let's at least have the report so that folks can go online and say, okay, what happened this week? And they look online and they can see that there's, you know, X amount of things that have gone on in a particular part of town. Okay, is that a problem? Are we sending the same police officer there every time? What are some of the ramifications? And so I think that kind of transparency would only help for our police department. And as I said, I think I think the police task force would be a huge deal. I really do. To a policing task force that gives a say-so from the community to what's going on in our police force. How about, and I mentioned this earlier, we're looking for a new chief. How about if we have, as these police chief candidates are being vetted, how about if we have a community meeting, maybe just people of color meeting with some of the candidates just to ask questions, just to find out more about it. I mean, these are all things that I think would be steps in the right direction to help our police department going forward, and to, you know, help with the growing diversity of our city. And as far as, you know, ramifications, if somebody does something wrong, you know, there's probably, you know, there's a lot of union stipulations within union contracts where, you know, I know that the police have some protections, but if they break the law, if they do something that's out of sorts, they need to be punished accordingly. I mean, I don't see how you do something wrong and you don't get punished for it. Whether you're wearing the badge or not. It just doesn't make sense to me to not have the same rules for the police that you do for everybody else.
Great. My next question, do you have contacts or community partnerships in Robbinsdale or in other local communities that you would use as resources to advance racial equity?
Well, I think it's an important question because I think that part of the problem that we've had in the past in bringing some diversity into Robbinsdale is that we've never had diversity in Robbinsdale. I mean, up until the last 15 or 20 years. I've lived here for 35 years. Went to high school at what is now Robbinsdale Middle School back in the 70s, back in the late 70s. So I can tell you that we had, I believe, 5 African Americans in my graduating class of 600 plus in Robbinsdale High School in 1979. And one of them was my best friend. So there, you know, I mean, Robbinsdale has been Snow White for a very long time, and things are changing. And I think it's, so as far as my contacts, you know, I have a lot of people who I work with in my business, people that I have hired in our radio and TV business, or excuse me, radio and magazine business. And so I've developed a lot of relationships with folks outside of Robbinsdale as well, in the African American community in particular. And you know, I think that I would reach out to them. I mean, that if you have those contacts to start off with, those are the people you call. And I would call them first to, you know, if there seems to be a situation where we could bring, you know, more people into and have more diversity, no question.
Excellent, thank you. My next question, what is your #1 priority or goal as mayor?
Well, the short answer is to make Robbinsdale an even better place for people to live, work, or own a business. And that is the short answer. And you know, you probably get the same answer from just about everybody. But I've got a number of issues that I have been following and kind of talking about over the last several weeks during the campaign. The policing issue. One of the things that I brought forward, and I'll talk about here, I haven't talked about yet tonight, with regard to police, is I would love to see our police get out on foot again. Walk a beat for an hour. You know, they're not always on call. I think that if we get our police force on a bike or on foot to talk to kids, whatever it might be, and develop relationships with the residents, and the residents know who the policemen are, and the policemen know who the residents are, that's only going to help us down the line. That makes us better, so that we understand who we're dealing with, and the police understand the residents, and the residents understand the police. And that's one of the initiatives that I would love to push forward. Whether I'm elected or not, I'm going to be pushing that one, because I think that one makes a ton of sense. That if there is, if there is, instead of a police car driving by, how about stopping, getting out and talking to the guy who's washing his car, or get out and talk to the kids that are on their bikes, and just find out what's new with them, and as you're walking around downtown, walk around downtown Robbinsdale for an hour, and meet with people. I know that they have the coffee with the cops thing. They had it, I think they have one at Willette, and I think they've had one at various restaurants and so on. Great idea. But I'd like to see this more often, not just once every month or two. I'd like to see something on that more on a regular basis. So that's one of the initiatives that I really am pushing for. And regardless, again, whether I'm elected or not, that's something that I'm going to be bugging whoever it is that gets elected to push forward. There are a couple of other things that I'd like to see. Within our city, I've been interested in getting more day-to-day businesses that people can use on a day-to-day basis in downtown Robbinsdale and in Robbins Center. We have a lot of elderly in the community, particularly you have the Cunningham, which has the handicapped residents, and then you have on the other side Copperfield Hill. They really depend on Robbins Center and downtown Robbinsdale. And so I'd like to see more businesses that cater the day-to-day needs. We've got the restaurants covered, I think. I think we're doing really good there, but I'd like to see us get more businesses along those lines. So those are a couple of things that I've been talking about. Those are at the top of my list.
Great, thank you. For anyone else who's joined midway through, just a little bit of housekeeping, that we are going through the questions that we as a group voted on that we wanted to ask Mr. Langfellow today. Wally's camera is off just for the sake of audio connection. And for me, the audio has been great. I haven't heard any other feedback from others. So let's carry on. We've got just a couple more questions, and then I'm going to pass it over to Nick to gather follow-up. And by the way, for everyone in the audience, if you're taking notes, if you have a question, you can put them in the chat. I think we'll do chat-based just to keep videos off for the sake of the connection. Okay, so next question for you, Mr. Langfellow. When should the City of Robbinsdale take the lead on social issues, and when should the city wait for action at the state or federal levels?
Well, I think it's important that when things happen on a local level that impact Robbinsdale, that we lead the way and take action locally. So as mayor, I think I would like to lead in these situations and not wait, for the feds or for the state. So those are, if it happens in Robbinsdale and if it's directly affecting Robbinsdale residents, that's when we need to move. We can't sit around and wait for the feds. That's what leadership is about. And that's what would be my intention. And I think that that's really important. And if you, if you intend to lead, which I do, leading is what I do. I run my own business. I run this basketball organization. I run this, I am the co-founder and I run this baseball organization bringing baseball to West Africa. So if you want to lead, lead. And so that's why I'm running for mayor, and that's what I would do in this situation. I think that you start locally. And if we start locally in a situation that affects us, then that's what we need to do. If it's something that's outside of our borders, if it's outside of Robbinsdale, then maybe we do have to wait for state or federal. But I think when it involves Robbinsdale residents, when it's important to Robbinsdale, then we need to lead on that.
Great. My next question, what is your vision for ensuring all Robbinsdale residents feel safe and free of harmful prejudices?
The number one thing I think is that to make sure that our police are the best trained that they could be. And that means in many cases and possibly retraining. In light of the George Floyd incident, I think that just about every police department nationwide, not just in the Twin Cities, needs to take a look in the mirror. Where are we at right now as a police department? And so the number one thing would be to make sure that they are trained and that they understand, and that we have to retrain, because if you look at what the training model is and how they've been trained over the years, if that's not working, or if it does not fall into what we consider at this point in time of being woke, so to speak, well, then that needs to happen. And so I really believe that that is number one on the list. As far as, as a city, we need to stand out as a place that people of all walks of life feel welcome. That really is important, because if people don't feel welcome, then the people who are here are going to be, they don't participate in the community. They don't go to whiz-bang days. They don't participate on these commissions and that type of thing. They need to feel welcome. And if they feel welcome, then I think you get more participation, and it makes it better for the community, and it makes us a better diverse community as well.
Wonderful, thanks. Next question, if elected, will you find it important to allocate city funds toward racial equity programs?
Yeah, and I already spoke about this a little bit when I talked a little bit earlier, but yes, our budget should be reflective of our population. As I mentioned a little earlier, starting a program to reach out to vendors, to reach out and encourage minority-owned businesses to come into Robbinsdale. I'd like to see, I'd like to see city staff, do that, to have the ability to sit down and, find people who are interested in coming into Robbinsdale And we need to take the time to do that. And if we don't make that extra effort, it's not going to happen. You can't just run an ad in the newspaper or wherever, online, obviously, in the newspaper. There aren't any ads in the newspaper anymore. But, you know, you can't just run an ad and hope that people come to you. You know, you have to make the effort. You have to make that extra phone call. I do a lot of sales in my business, you know, with advertisers for our radio programming and for my magazine. And they're not coming to me. I have to call, I have to seek them out. And that's what we need. We need our staff to seek these people out. And you have to look places that you've never looked before. And I think that part of what I bring to the table, again, is relationships with people, particularly in the business community and the African-American community, that, you know, I can say, okay, here, call this guy. And you start right. That's a good place to start. And if he doesn't know, or he or she doesn't know, they can tell you who to call. Those are the type of things we need to do. You can't just run an ad and hope that they're going to come to you.
Great. Now, one more question from our list, and then we'll open it up to the chat. Excuse me, to the chat for others to ask any follow-ups. So, last question for you in this part of our meeting. Do you feel that the city parks and recreation serve all residents living in Robbinsdale?
Well, I'm a big park and rec guy. My whole family has worked, including myself, has worked park and rec at one time or another over the last, and I won't, well, okay, I'll admit it. I worked park and rec from 1977 to about 1980 or 81. And then the rest of my family more recently. But I guess I'd have to see the numbers from park and rec as far as who's getting permits to do what, to get a better idea of, you know, are we serving people? Are we serving everybody? I think that, you know, maybe Pam or Ryan could give us numbers on, you know, who the people are that are getting the permits and using our park facilities. But as mayor, I want to make sure that our parks and recreation facilities are serving anyone and everyone who wants to use them. You know, they're there, but if you're, again, and I go back to what I said earlier, if you're not comfortable doing that, then maybe there's people of color who say, you know what, I always go down there and all I see, you know, I don't see anybody who looks like me, so maybe that's not for me. That's not a place I want to go. So I think that it would be good to know, get those numbers, get information from, and I'm sure, you know, just to get information from Park and Rec on who's using the facilities. And maybe what we need to do is, you know, to try and get more demographic information, you know, when permits are given out for whether it's whether it's a ball field or whether it is a, you know, a picnic area or whether it's the pavilion or whatever. The other thing is, you know, not just people of color, but seniors. You know, I mean, are we serving our seniors in our parks? I mean, let's not forget that. Eventually, we'll all be there. Some of us that it would really help if we make sure that you know, our parks are doing the same thing. Look, if we have a track where people are running, well, are the seniors going to feel like that's a good place for them, or is it, you know, or they feel like they're going to get run over? You know, there's a track, for example, around at Robbinsdale Middle School, there's a track that runs around the entirety of the ball fields. I don't know if you've ever done that, but you know, if a senior feels okay walking that, then, you know, maybe they don't because they see people on their bikes there, or they see people that are going 10 times faster than them. So those are the type of things with regard to Park and Rec that I think they're important. But again, you know, as far as people of color and that type of thing, I really do think that we have to have some numbers to be draw any conclusions.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. So we've covered the questions that this group has prepared for you. I want to give enough space and time for follow-up questions in the chat. So for those of you in the audience, based on what you've heard so far. If you have questions for Mr. Langfellow, you can type them in the chat. I am going to pass the hosting over to Nick. I'll continue to record, but I do need to prepare for my next meeting. So Mr. Langfellow, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Nick now. Give me just a moment to do so.
All right, thanks, Mia. I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, this is where I get to step in. Thanks,
right.
everyone. So everyone here has the ability to unmute themselves. So please, if you want to speak up, by all means, unmute yourself. However, I'm going to start with the first question from Jackie. Mr. Langfellow, what are your thoughts on the Robbinsdale Fire Department and their training in reference to racial equality, given many of their calls are non-fire related in the community?
Boy, you know what, and I apologize, Jackie, for not touching on this earlier, because I did have it in my notes when I mentioned city staff, lack of diversity in our city staff and total lack of diversity in our police department. I meant to, and I apologize. I think fire department is equally as important. So Robbinsdale, if I'm not mistaken, is still for the most part a volunteer fire department. We do have some on-call paid firemen, but I know that we're also a volunteer fire department. So again, it goes back to recruiting and making that effort to get folks involved who would be, people of color involved, so that is part of, who we are now. Let's have our fire department reflect who we are. Again, the percentages that we talked about a little bit earlier, I don't know what our percentages are right now. African-American community, maybe somewhere between 5 and 10% possibly. But I would like to see that on the fire department as well. And as far as answering calls that aren't actual fire calls, then it becomes more, to me, those are things like for social workers. That's what it sounds like to me. And maybe I'm mistaken, maybe I misunderstood your question, but to me, that's what rings to me.
All right, thanks. I've got another question, a little bit more broad, and maybe you touched on it, so I apologize if you're repeating yourself. But what prompted you to run for mayor?
Well, a couple of things, and I've been asked this a few times, particularly by my wife. But it is the timing is good for me. I've always been involved in our community for the last 20 plus years, in particular. But our youngest son just moved out in May. Graduated from college from St. Cloud State back in May and took a job as a TV reporter over in Wausau, Wisconsin. I'm very proud, so I keep mentioning that to everybody. But so the timing for me is good. So now I can focus the efforts, because we always thought all along that the number one thing is we wanted to raise our family. And so when this opportunity came up, I thought, if I'm ever going to do this, now is the time. And so I decided that this would be a good time for me. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part would be having been here as long as I've been here, the 35 years we've lived in Robbinsdale. I have, again, I've been on the periphery of issues and watched city council and so on, and been involved in the community. My wife, as a matter of fact, started the flower baskets in downtown Robbinsdale that that everybody sees. Her and her friends started that about 10 years ago. But my inkling was that I wanted to step forward because there are, things that I think are important that need to be addressed. And I talked about the policing. I talked about that earlier. I've talked about the downtown. There's talk of a new community center. These are the issues that I am passionate about, and I think I have some pretty good ideas, and I have experience. I'm bringing a new perspective. The three councilmen have all been, they have the perspective from council. I'm trying to bring a perspective of a resident who has experience. And I'm not just some guy who walks in here and doesn't really know anything about Robbinsdale. I know a lot about Robbinsdale. So I think that those things combined have pushed me to where I wanted to run for mayor, and that's why I'm here.
All right, great. I'm gonna read back some of the feedback. Jackie said in response to her question, thank you so much for mentioning social work professionals. We agree that they are needed to assist both the RPD and RFD. So thank you for that. Becky like to comment on your comment about police walking or biking, and she agrees that connection with the residents could go a long way. So thanks for that.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the group? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
Wally, this is Erin Merrill. I just wanted to ask, as other communities and cities continue to talk about defunding the police and moving those funds to other professionals that could help with nonviolent situations, what are your thoughts on those discussions? And if that came up within Robbinsdale by community members who thought we should also look into something like that, what would your stance be in regards to that?
Unfortunately, I think that the term defunding the police is kind of misconstrued by a lot of people, and I'm sure you're well aware of that. I think it's more, as you have eloquently stated, moving funding to, to different areas. I am 100% in favor of, especially nonviolent situations. If there is if there's a homeless person who needs help, do we really need our police officer to run to that situation? It would be great to have a social worker. I have a good friend who's a social worker. These are the type of situations that I think that these people could play a great role in. And honestly, and you've heard this. I mean, this is on a national level. You've heard this, that police are generally, they're not necessarily trained for a lot of the stuff that the social workers are trained for. And they don't necessarily, I don't know if the term want to do that is the right thing to say, but they would rather do other things. They would rather be involved in other ways. So it's a great question. I think that, there should be funding that would move from one area to the next. I don't want to use the word defunding because I think that it's taken out of context. And so I won't use that term, but I will use the term moving funding from one area to the other. And I think that we should absolutely have the ability to do
that. So some follow-up questions kind of on that same vein. What are some scenarios would you see a social worker, or basically what incidences would a fire department be needed to, sorry, I'm struggling with this. What instances would the fire department need a social worker? That's exactly what I'm trying to say. So for example, why would a Robbinsdale Fire Department respond to a call of a homeless person rather than a social worker?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know why the fire department would be called into that situation. I think somebody brought that point up earlier, saying that our fire department is called into non-fire calls. So that's why that was my reference there. I don't think that I wasn't suggesting that the fire department would be called to that. I was kind of answering a question from earlier where somebody suggested that the fire department is being called to non-fire calls, and that perhaps, depending on what that call might be, that a social, somebody who is more, who's better trained in that area would be a better fit for that situation. So I think that was just kind of a miscommunication.
All right, great. And Becky, if you feel free to open up your mic if you want any clarifying questions. and I'll give you a moment to unmute yourself. Otherwise, if anyone else has any other questions, please unmute and ask away, as we've got a couple more minutes to start wrapping up. All right, I'm going to take that silence as that we have no additional questions. So I'm going to bring this meeting to a close. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's one question in the chat.
Do you want to go ahead and read that off then?
Oh, I'm sorry. It just says, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. Wally, you've talked a lot about bringing diversity into city government and business ownership, but what are your thoughts on addressing the wealth gap ownership, the wealth gap, home ownership gap, wage gap, and education gap in our city?
Good question. You know, the home ownership, I mean, I don't necessarily know that that is an issue that's unique to Robbinsdale. And, you know, how we address it, that's a fair question. I mean, if we're able to address it through, are there means through Hennepin County where they can help us, you know, with, or the state, where home ownership for you know, African Americans or people of color coming into Robbinsdale, can we help, and maybe it's communication, can we help make those funding that might be available through the state or through the county or whoever, I think it would be our job, it's incumbent on us to better lay out what those options and opportunities are so that we can close that gap. And I think that that's probably number one on the list, because, you know, as you probably know, we don't have, you know, we're a population of about, you know, a little over 14,000. So we don't have deep pockets in Robbinsdale. But I think in general, city government, one of the things, and I'm in the communications business, one of the things that we need to do a way better job at is communication. And I think that if we take a look at, you know, what is available to help folks get into home ownership, and get that information out and put it on our city website, you know, have a link on there that says home ownership, and you click on it, or whatever it is, whatever it might be, and have people make the information more readily available so that they know where to find the funding to get a loan or whatever programs might exist to help bring people into home ownership, because that helps our community. That's going to solidify our community. You know, the opportunity to rent is necessary. The opportunity to own is better. And I really believe that, and I think that we can close that gap by giving people the information that they need. And number one on that list for Robbinsdale would be communication, because a lot of times I think we fail in the area of communication, and I've seen it. And you know, as I said, that's my business. So communication is number one on my list.
All right. Thanks, Wally. We're going to start closing this up, and I want to invite you to, if you have one prepared, to provide a brief closing statement, and also tell us the best ways to find you online, or the best ways to continue the conversations outside this meeting, as I'm sure many people here will love to ask you more questions and your views. So I'll give you a brief, give you a moment for your closing statements.
All right, great. Thanks, Nick. So as I talked about a little bit earlier, you know, I'm running to try and make a difference and to give City Council a fresh set of eyes and a fresh set of ideas. Remember, though, the mayor's office only has one vote, just like the City Council. So I'd be just one guy, but you do have the platform of being mayor. You know, I've owned and run a business for the past 26 years, so I know what business owners are going through. I know how to keep things in a budget. Our family's been here for 35 years, but I bring the perspective of a longtime resident who knows Robbinsdale. And as I've told people, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but this really isn't about me. It's about making Robbinsdale an even better place to live and work and raise a family and own a business. So that, in conclusion, is what I hope for, and I ask for your vote. And if you want to know more about me, or if you want to contact me, my website is wallyformayor.com, and I also have a Facebook page, which is Wally Langfellow for Mayor on Facebook. I believe that's correct. Yeah, it's Wally Langfellow for Mayor on Facebook. So thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great fielding the questions tonight. I've really enjoyed it.
All right, well, thank you. And thank you all for attending. And especially thank you, Mr. Langfellow, for your time with us today. Everyone, please be sure that you are registered to vote. Vote early by mail, and be sure your ballot is postmarked by August 11th. If you vote in person on the 11th, please wear a mask and practice social distancing. Thank you for your time. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.